way, with everyone's purses growing lighter and their bellies tighter by the day. Or they could press on to Lugard. Here his voice began to take on energy. He gestured, but simply. He still moved among them, but stepping more quickly. Lugard was a grand city. Ebudar was a shadow beside Lugard. Lugard truly was one of the great cities, so populous they might perform there all spring and always have new crowds. Matt had never been to Lugard, but he had heard it was half a ruin, with a king who could not afford to keep the streets clean. Yet Luca made it sound akin to Cainland. Surely some of these people had seen the place, but they listened with rapt faces as he described palaces that made the terracing palace in Ebudar seem a hovel. Talked of the silk-clad nobles by the score who had come to see them perform, or even commission private performances. Surely King Verdran would want such. Had any of them ever performed before a king before? They would. They would. From Lugard to Cainland, the city that made Lugard look like an imitation of a city. Cainland, one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the world, where they might perform the whole summer to never-ending throngs. I should like to see these cities, Tuan said, moving Archaeen nearer to Pips. Will you show them to me, Toy? Selucia kept the gun at Tuan's hip. The woman looked composed enough, but doubtless she was shaken by what she had seen.
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
Lugard, maybe. From there I can find a way to send you back to Ebudar. With a well-guarded merchant's train and as many reliable bodyguards as he could hire. Tuan might be as capable and dangerous as Aginin made out, but 2 women alone would be seen as easy prey by too many and not just brigands. Maybe Cainland. He might need more time than from here to Lugard, after all. We shall see what we shall see, Tuan replied cryptically, then began exchanging finger wriggles with Selucia. Talking about me behind my back, only doing it right under my nose. He hated it when they did that. Luca's as good as a gleeman, Tom, but I don't think he's going to sway them. Tom snorted derisively and knuckled his long white mustaches. He's not bad, I'll grant him that, but he's no gleeman. Still, he's caught them, I'd say. A wager on it, my boy? Say, 1 gold crown? Matt surprised himself by laughing. He had been sure he would not be able to laugh again until he could rid his head of the image of that peddler sinking into the road. And the horses. He could almost hear them screaming still, loudly enough that it came near to drowning out the dice. You want to wager with me? Very well, done. I wouldn't play at dice with you, Tom said dryly, but I know a man turning a crowd's head with words when I see it. I've done as much myself. Finishing with Cainland,
little late coming on, I just had to take a shower real quick.
The man strutted. And from there, he announced, to Tarvalon itself. I will hire ships to carry us all. Matt did choke at that. Luca would hire ships.
Oh, my brother got his back.
Who was tight enough to render
I don't have no wheels.
Such crowds will come in Tarvalon that we could spend the rest of our lives in that vast city's splendor, where Ogier-built shops seem like palaces, and palaces are beyond description. Rulers seeing Tarvalon for the first time weep that their cities are villages, and their own palaces no more than peasants' huts. The White Tower itself is in Tarvalon, remember? The greatest structure in the world. The Amaran seat herself will ask us to perform before her. We have given shelter to 3 Aes Sedai in need. Who can believe they will do other than speak for us with the Amaran seat? Matt looked over his shoulder and found the 3 sisters no longer wandering about the meadow where the village had vanished. Instead, they stood side by side in the road, watching him, perfect images of Aes Sedai serenity. No, they were not watching him, he realized. They were studying Tuan. The 3 had agreed not to bother her anymore, and being Aes Sedai were bound by that. But how far did an Aes Sedai's word ever go? They found ways around the oath against lying all the time. So Tuan would not get to see Cainland, and perhaps not Lugard. Chances were there would be Aes Sedai in both cities. What easier for Jolene and the others than to inform those Aes Sedai that Tuan was a Shan Shanghai lady? In all likelihood, Tuan would be on her way to Tarvalon before he could blink. As a guest, of course, to help stop the fighting. No doubt many would say that would be for the good, that he should hand her over himself and tell them who she really was. but he had given his word. He began to calculate how near to Lugard he dared wait before finding a passage back to Ecuador. Luca had had a difficult time making Tarvalin sound greater than Camelin after his spiel on that city, and if they ever reached Tarvalin, some might actually be disappointed comparing his mad descriptions. The White Tower 1,000 paces high, ogre-built palaces the size of small mountains. He claimed there was an ogre steading actually inside the city. But finally he called for a show of hands in favor of pressing on. Every hand shot up, even the children's hands, and they had no vote. Matt pulled a purse from his coat pocket and handed over an Ebudari crown. I never enjoyed losing more, Tom. Well, never enjoyed losing, but in this instance it was better than winning. Tom accepted with a small bow. I think I'll keep this as a memento, he said, rolling the fat gold coin across the back of his fingers. To remind me that even the luckiest man in the world can lose. For all the show of hands, there was a shadow of reluctance to cross that patch of road ahead. After Luca got his wagon back onto the road, he sat staring, with Littell clinging to his arm as hard as Amathera ever clung to Julian. Finally, he muttered something that might have been an oath and whipped his team up with the reins. By the time they reached the fatal stretch, they were at a gallop. Luca kept them there until well beyond where the paving stones had been. It was the same with every wagon. A pause, waiting until the wagon ahead was clear, then a flailing of reins and a hard gallop. Matt himself drew a deep breath before hitting Pip's forward. At a walk, not a gallop, but it was hard not to dig his heels in, especially when passing the peddler's hat. Tuon's dark face and Selucia's pale displayed no more emotion than Aes Sedai's faces did. I will see Tarvalin one day, Tuon said calmly in the middle of that. I shall probably make it my capital. I shall have you show me the city, Toy. You have been there. White. She was a tough little woman, gorgeous but definitely tough as nails. After slowing from his gallop, Luca set the pace at a fast walk, rather than the show's usual amble. The sun slid lower, and they passed several roadside meadows sufficiently large to hold the show, but Luca pressed on until their shadows stretched long ahead of them, and the sun was a fat red ball on the horizon. Even then he sat holding the reins and peering at a grassy expanse beside the road. It's just a field, he said at last, too loudly,
Yeah,
and turned
cheers.
his team toward it. Matt accompanied Tuon and Selucia to the purple wagon once the horses had been handed over to Metwin. But there was to be no meal or games of stones with her that night. This is a night for prayer, she told him before going in with her maid. Do you know nothing, Tuon? The dead walking is a sign that Tarmangaddon is near. He did not take this for one of her superstitions. After all, he had thought something very like that himself. He was not much for praying, yet he offered a small one then and there. Sometimes there was nothing else to do. No one wanted to sleep, so lamps burned late throughout the camp. No one wanted to be alone, either. Matt ate by himself in his tent, with little appetite, and the dice in his head sounding louder than ever. But Tom came to play stones just as he finished, and Noel soon after. Lopin and Naren popped in every few minutes, bowing and inquiring whether Matt or the others wanted anything, but once they fetched wine in cups, Lopin carried the tall pottery jar and broke the wax seal. Naren carried the cups on a wood tray. Matt told them to find Hanin and the other soldiers. I don't doubt they're getting drunk, which seems a good notion to me, he said. That's an order. You tell them I said to share. Lopin bowed gravely over his round belly. I have assisted the file leader now and again by procuring a few items for him, my lord. I expect he will be generous with the brandy. Come along, Naren. Lord Matt wants us to get drunk, and you are getting drunk with me if I have to sit on you and pour brandy down your throat. The abstemious Carianan's narrow face grew pinched with disapproval, but he bowed and followed the tyrant out with alacrity. Matt did not think Lopin would need to sit on the man, not tonight. Julian came with Amathera and Olver, so games of snakes and foxes, blades sprawled on the ground cloth, were added to stones played at the small table. Amathera proved an adequate player at stones, unsurprising given that she had been a ruler once, but her mouth became even more pouty when she and Olver lost at snakes and foxes. although nobody ever won that game. Then again, Matt suspected she had not been a very good ruler. Whoever was not playing sat on the cot. Matt watched the games when it was his turn there, as did Julian if Amathera was playing. He seldom took his eyes from her, except when it was his turn at a game. Noel nattered on with his stories, but then he spun those tales even while playing, and talking seemed to have no effect on his skill at stones. And Tom sat reading the letter Matt had brought him, what seemed a very long time ago. The page was heavily creased from being carried in Tom's coat pocket, and much smudged from being read and reread. He had said it was from a dead woman. It was a surprise when Doman and Aginin ducked through the entry flaps. They had not precisely been avoiding Matt since he moved out of the green wagon, but neither had they gone out of their way to seek him out. Like everyone else, they were in better clothes than they had worn for disguises in the beginning. Aginin's divided skirts and high-collared coat, both of blue wool and embroidered in a yellow near to gold on the hem and cuffs, had something of a uniform about them, while Doman, in a well-cut brown coat and baggy trousers stuffed into turned-down boots just below his knees, looked every inch the prosperous, if not exactly wealthy, Ileana merchant. As soon as Aginin entered, Amathera, who was on the ground cloth with Olver, curled herself into a ball on her knees. Julian sighed and got up from the stool across the table from Matt, but Aginin reached the other woman first. "There's no need for that, with me or anyone else," she drawled, bending to take Amathera by the shoulders and draw her to her feet. Amathera rose slowly, hesitantly, and kept her eyes down until Aginin put a hand beneath her chin and raised her head gently. "You look me in the eyes. You look everyone in the eyes." The Terrabonner woman touched her tongue to her lips nervously, but she did keep looking straight at Aginin's face when the hand was removed from her chin. On the other hand, her eyes were very wide. "This is a change," Julian said suspiciously, and with a touch of anger. He stood stiff as a statue carved from dark wood. He disliked any Seanchan for what they had done to Amathera. "You've called me a thief for freeing her." There was more than a touch of anger in that. He hated thieves, and smugglers, which Doman was. "All things change, given time," Doman said jovially, smiling to head off more heated words. "Why you do be looking at an honest man, Master Thief Catcher? Lylwyn did make me promise to give up smuggling before she would agree to marry me. Fortune pricked me. Who did ever hear of a woman refusing to marry a man unless he did give up a lucrative trade?" He laughed as though that were the funniest joke in the world. Aginin fisted him in the ribs, hard enough to change his laughter to a grunt. Married to her, his ribs must be a mass of bruises. "I expect you to keep that promise, Vale. I am changing, and so must you." Eyeing Amathera briefly, perhaps to make sure she was still obeying, Aginin was big on others doing as she told them. She stuck out a hand toward Julian. "I am changing, Master Sandar. Will you?" Julian hesitated, then clasped her hand.
There's one.
"I'll make a try at it." He sounded doubtful. "An honest try is all I ask." Frowning around the tent, she shook her head. "I've seen Olaf decks less crowded than this. We have some decent wine in our wagon, Master Sandar. Will you and your lady join us in a cup or two?" Again, Julian hesitated. "He has this game all but won," he said finally. "No point in playing it out." Wrapping his conical red hat on his head, he adjusted his dark, flaring tyrant coat unnecessarily and offered his arm to Amathera formally. She clasped it tightly, and though her eyes were still on Aginin's face, she trembled visibly. "I expect Olver will want to stay here and play his game, but my lady and I will be pleased to share wine with you and your husband, Mistress Shipless." There was a hint of challenge in his gaze. It was clear that to him, Aginin had further to go to prove she no longer saw Amathera as stolen property. Aginin nodded as if she understood perfectly. "The light shine on you tonight, and for as many days and nights as we have remaining," she said by way of farewell to those staying. Cheerful of her. No sooner had the four departed than thunder boomed overhead. Another loud peal, and rain began pattering on the tent roof, quickly growing to a downpour that drummed the green-striped canvas. Unless Julian and the others had run, they would do their drinking wet. Noel settled on the other side of the red cloth from over and took up Amatera's part of the game, rolling the dice for the snakes and the foxes. The black discs that now represented Olver and him were nearly to the edge of the web-marked cloth, but it was evident to any eye that they would not make it. To any eye but Olver's, at least. He groaned loudly when a pale disc, inked with a wavy line, a snake, touched his piece, and again when a disc marked with a triangle touched Noel's. Noel took up the tale he had left off when Egenin and Doman appeared, as well as a story of some supposed voyage on a seafolk breaker.
"I found the air women are the most graceful in the world,"
he said, moving the black discs back to the circle in the center of the board.
"Even more so than the money. And you know, that's saying something. And when they're out of sight of land..."
He cut off abruptly and cleared his throat, eyeing Oliver, who was stacking the snakes and foxes on the board's corners. "What do they do then?" Oliver asked.
"Why,"
Noel rubbed his nose with a gnarled finger.
"Why, they scramble about the rigging so nimbly, you'd think they had hands where their feet should be. That's what they do."
Oliver oohed, and Noel gave a soft sigh of relief. Matt began removing the black and white stones from the board on the table, placing them in two carved wooden boxes. The dice in his head bounced and rattled even when the thunder was loudest. "Another game, Tom?" The white-haired man looked up from his letter.
"I think not, Matt. My mind's in a maze tonight."
"If you don't mind my asking, Tom, why do you read that letter the way you do? I mean, sometimes your face looks like you're trying to puzzle out what it means." Oliver yelped with glee at a good toss of the dice.
"That's because I am, in a way. Here."
He held out the letter, but Matt shook his head. "It's no business of mine, Tom. It's your letter, and I'm no good with puzzles."
"Oh, it's your business, too. Maureen wrote it just before... Well, anyway, she wrote it."
Matt stared at him for a long moment before taking the creased page, and when his eyes fell on the smudged ink, he blinked. Small, precise writing covered the sheet, but it began, "My dearest Tom." Who would have thought Maureen, of all people, would address old Tom Maryland so? "Tom, this is personal. I don't think I should..."
"Read," Tom cut in. "You'll see."
Matt drew a deep breath. A letter from a dead-eye Sedai that was a puzzle and concerned him in some way. Suddenly he wanted nothing less than to read the thing. But he began anyway. It was near enough to make his hair stand on end. "My dearest Tom, there are many words I would like to write to you, words from my heart, but I have put this off because I knew that I must, and now there is little time. There are many things I cannot tell you lest I bring disaster, but what I can, I will. Heed carefully what I say. In a short while, I will go down to the docks, and there I will confront land fear. How can I know that? That secret belongs to others. Suffice it that I know, and let that foreknowledge stand as proof for the rest of what I say. When you receive this, you will be told that I am dead. All will believe that. I am not dead, and it may be that I shall live to my appointed years. It also may be that you and Matt Coffin and another, a man I do not know, will try to rescue me. May, I say, because it may be that you will not or cannot, or because Matt may refuse. He does not hold me in the affection you seem to, and he has his reasons which he no doubt thinks are good. If you try, it must be only you and Matt and one other. More will mean death for all. Fewer will mean death for all. Even if you come only with Matt and one other, death also may come. I have seen you try and die, one or two or all three. I have seen myself die in the attempt. I have seen all of us live and die as captives. Should you decide to make the attempt anyway, young Matt knows the way to find me. Yet you must not show him this letter until he asks about it. That is of the utmost importance. He must know nothing that is in this letter until he asks. Events must play out in certain ways, whatever the costs. If you see Lan again, tell him that all of this is for the best. His destiny follows a different path from mine. I wish him all happiness with Nynaeve. A final point. Remember what you know about the game of snakes and foxes. Remember and heed. It is time, and I must do what must be done. May the light illumine you and give you joy, my dearest Tom, whether or not we ever see one another again. Moraine. Thunder boomed as he finished. Fitting that. Shaking his head, he handed the letter back. Tom, he said gently, Lan's bond to her was broken. It takes death to do that. He said she was dead. And her letter says everyone would believe that. She knew that. She knew it all in advance. That's as may be, but Moraine and Lanfear went into that door-frame Tirongriel, and it melted. The thing was redstone, or looked to be stone, Tom. Yet it melted like wax. I saw it. She went to wherever the Aelfin are. And even if she is alive, there's no way for us to get there anymore. The Tower of Genjai, Oliver piped up, and all three adults turned their heads to stare at him. Birgitta told me, he said defensively. The Tower of Genjai is the way to the lands of the Aelfin and the Eilfin. He made the gesture that began a game of snakes and foxes, a triangle drawn in the air, and then a wavy line through it. She knows even more stories than you, Master Charn.
That wouldn't be Brigitta's silver bow, would it?
Noel said wryly. The boy gave him a level look. I'm not an infant, Master Charn.
Kind of made that
But
one
she
a
is
little
very good with the
pregnant.
bow, so maybe she is. Brigitta born again, I mean. I don't think there's any chance of that, Matt said. I've talked with her too, you know, and the last thing she wants is to be any kind of hero. He kept his promises, and Brigitta's secrets were safe with him. In any case, knowing about this tower doesn't help much unless she told you where it is. Oliver shook his head sadly, and Matt bent to ruffle his hair. Not your fault, boy. Without you, we wouldn't even know it exists. That did not seem to help much. Oliver stared at the red cloth game board dejectedly.
The Tower of Genjai.
Noel said, sitting up cross-legged and tugging his coat straight.
Not many know that tale anymore. Jane always said he'd go looking for it one day. Somewhere along the Shadow Coast, he said.
That's still a lot of ground to search. Matt fitted the lid on one of the boxes. It could take years. Years they did not have if Tuon was right, and he was sure that she was. Tom shook his head.
She says you know, Matt. Matt knows the way to find me. I doubt very much she'd have written that on a whim.
Well, I can't help what she says, now can I? I never heard of any Tower of Genjai until tonight.
A pity.
Noel sighed.
I'd have liked to have seen it. Something Jane bloody Farstrider never did. You might as well give over,
He added when Tom opened his mouth.
He wouldn't forget seeing it. And even if he never heard the name, he'd have to think of it when he'd heard of a strange tower that lets people into other lands. The thing gleams like burnished steel, I'm told. 200 feet high and 40 thick. And there's not an opening to be found in it. Who could forget seeing that?
Matt went very still. His black scarf felt too tight against his hanging scar. The scar itself suddenly felt fresh and hot. It was hard for him to draw breath.
If there's no opening, how do we get in?
Tom wanted to know. Noel shrugged, but Oliver spoke up once more. Brigitta says you make the sign on the side of it anywhere with a bronze knife. He made the sign that started the game. She says it has to be a bronze knife. Make the sign, and a door opens.
What else did she tell you about?
Tom began, then cut off with a frown.
What ails you, Matt?
You look about to sick up. What ailed him was his memory, and not the other men's memories for once.
Those had been stuffed into him to fill holes in his own memories, which they did and more, or so it seemed. He certainly remembered many more days than he had lived, but whole stretches of his own life were lost to him, and others were like moth-riddled blankets or shadowy and dim. He had only spotty memories of fleeing Shadowlogeth, and very vague recollections of escaping on Doman's river ship. But one thing seen on that voyage stood out: a tower shining like burnished steel. Sick up, his stomach wanted to empty itself. I think I know where that tower is, Tom. Rather, Doman knows. But I can't go with you. The eelfin will know I'm coming. Maybe the aelfin, too. Burnley, they might already know about this letter because I read it. They might know every word we've said. You can't trust them. They'll take advantage if they can. If they know you're coming, they'll be planning to do just that. They'll skin you and make harnesses for themselves from your hide. His memories of them were all his own, but they were more than enough to support the judgment. They stared at him as if he were mad, even older. There was nothing for it but to tell them about his encounters with the aelfin and the eelfin, as much as was needful at least. Not about his answers from the eelfin, certainly, or his two gifts from the aelfin. But the other men's memories were necessary to explain what he had reasoned out about the eelfin and aelfin having links to him now, and the pale leather harnesses the eelfin wore. Those seemed important, and how they had tried to kill him, that was very important. He had said he wanted to leave, and failed to say alive, so they took him outside and hanged him. He even removed the scarf to show his scar for extra weight, and he seldom let anybody see that. The three of them listened in silence, Tom and Noel intently, Alder's mouth slowly dropping open in wonder. The rain beating on the tent roof was the only sound aside from his voice. That all has to stay inside this tent, he finished. Aes Sedai have enough reasons already to want to put their hands on me. If they find out about those memories, I'll never be free of them. Would he ever be entirely free of them? He was beginning to think not. Yet there was no reason to give them fresh reasons to meddle in his life. Are you any relation to Jane? Noel raised his hands in a placating gesture. Peace, man, I believe you. It's just that tops anything I ever did. Anything Jane ever did, too. Would you mind if I made the third? I can be handy in tight spots, you know. Burn me. Did everything I say pass in one ear and out the other? They'll know I'm coming. They may already know everything. And it doesn't matter, Tom put in. Not to me. I'll go by myself if necessary. But if I read this correctly, he began folding the letter up almost tenderly. The only hope of success is if you are one of the three. He sat there on the cot, silent now, looking Rat in the eye. Rat wanted to look away and could not. Bloody Aes Sedai. The woman almost certainly was dead, and yet she still tried coercing him into being a hero. Well, heroes got patted on the head and pushed out of the way until the next time a hero was needed, if they survived being a hero in the first place. Very often heroes did not. He had never really trusted Moraine, or liked her either. Only fools trusted Aes Sedai. But then, if not for her, he would be back in the Two Rivers, mucking out the barn and tending his Da's cows. Or he would be dead. And there old Tom sat, saying nothing, just staring at him. That was the rub. He liked Tom. Oh, blood and bloody ashes. Burn me for a fool, he muttered. I'll go. Thunder crashed deafeningly like a flash of lightning so bright it shone through the tent canvas. When the rumbling booms faded, there was dead silence in his head. The last set of dice had stopped. He could have wept. Chapter 11. A Hell in Madarin. Despite the late hours kept by everyone that night, the show made a very early start the next morning. Rainy-eyed and groggy, Matt trudged out of his tent while the sky was still dark to find men and women with lanterns trotting to get ready when they were not running, and nearly everyone shouting for somebody or other to move faster. Many had the unsteady step of people who had not slept. Everyone seemed to feel that the farther they could get from where that village had vanished in front of their eyes, the better. Luca's great gaudy wagon took to the road before the sun had cleared the horizon, and once again he set a goodly pace. 2 merchants' trains of 20 or so wagons each passed them heading south, and a slow caravan of tinkers, but nothing going the other way. The farther, the better. Matt rode with Tuon, and Solution made no attempt to put the Dun between them, yet there was no conversation, however much he tried to start one, save for an occasional unreadable glance when he made a sally or told a joke.
Oh, that sucks.
Tuon rode looking straight ahead,
That
cowl
thing
and blue cloak hiding her face.
make you lose your hit.
Even juggling failed to catch her attention. There was something broody about her silence, and it worried him. When a woman went silent on you, there usually was trouble in the offing. When she brooded, you could forget about usually. He doubted it was the village of the dead that had her fretting. She was too tough for that. No, there was trouble ahead. Little more than an hour after they set out, a farm on rolling ground hove into sight, with dozens of black-faced goats cropping grass in a wide pasture and a large olive grove. Boys weeding among the rows of dark-leaved olive trees dropped their hoes and rushed down to the stone fences to watch the show pass, shouting with excitement to know who they were and where they were going and where coming from. Men and women came out of the sprawling tile-roofed farmhouse and 2 big thatch-roofed barns, shading their eyes to watch. Matt was relieved to see it. The dead paid no mind to the living. As the show rolled onward, farms and olive groves grew thicker on the ground until they ran side by side, pushing the forest back a mile or more on either side of the road. And well short of mid-morning, they reached a prosperous town somewhat larger than Jurador. A merchant's long train of canvas-topped wagons was turning in at the main gates, where half a dozen men in polished conical helmets and leather coats sewn with steel discs stood guard with halberds. More men, cradling crossbows, kept watch atop the 2 gate towers. But if the lord of Madarin, one Nathan Sarmain Vendare, expected trouble, the guards were the only sign of it. Farms and olive groves reached right to the stone walls of Madarin, an unsound practice, and right costly should the town ever need to be defended. Luca had to bargain with the farmer for the right to set up the show in an unused pasture, and came back muttering that he had just bought the scoundrel a new flock of goats, or maybe 2. But the canvas wall was soon rising, with Luca chivying everyone for speed. They were to perform today and leave early in the morning. Very early. Nobody complained or much said an unneeded word. The
Hell yeah.
the better. And tell no one what you saw, Luca cautioned more than once. We saw nothing.
I'm smoking roaches right
We
now.
want to frighten the patrons away. People looked at him as if he were insane. No one wanted to think of that melting village or the peddler, much less speak of them. Matt was sitting in his tent, in his shirt sleeves, waiting for Tom and Julian to return from their trip into the town to learn whether there was a Shawnchan presence. He was idly tossing a set of dice on his small table. After an early run of mostly high numbers, 5 single pips stared up at him 10 times in a row. Most men thought the Dark One's eyes an unlucky toss. Solution pulled back the entry flap and strode in. Despite her plain brown divided skirts and white blouse, she managed to seem a queen entering a stable. A filthy stable by the expression on her face, though Lopen and Naram could have satisfied his mother when it came to cleaning. She wants you, she drawled peremptorily, touching her flowered scarf to make sure her short yellow hair was covered. Come. What she want with me then? He said, and leaned his elbows on the table. He even stretched out his legs and crossed his ankles. Once you let a woman think you would jump whenever she called, you never got out from under again. She'll tell you. You're wasting time, Toy. She won't be pleased. If Precious expects me to come running when she crooks a finger, she better learn to like being displeased. Grimacing, if her mistress tolerated the name, Solution took it for a personal affront. She folded her arms beneath that impressive bosom. It was clear as good glass that she intended to wait there until he went with her, and he was of a mind to make it a long wait. He tossed the dice. The Dark One's eyes. expecting him to jump when Tuan said toad. Ha! Another toss, spinning across the table, one eye nearly going over the edge. The dark one's eyes. Still, he had nothing else to do at the moment. Even so, he took his time donning his coat, a good bronze-colored silk. By the time he picked up his hat, he could hear her foot tapping impatiently. "Well, what are you waiting for?" he asked. She hissed at him. She held the entry flap open, but she purely hissed like a cat. Satala and Tuan were sitting on one of the beds, talking, when he entered the purple wagon, but they cut off the instant he stepped through the door and gave him brief but appraising looks, which told him the subject of their talk had been Matt Coffin. It made his hackles rise. Plainly, whatever Tuan wanted was something they thought he would disapprove of. And just as plainly, she meant to have it anyway. The table was snug against the ceiling, and Selucia brushed past him to take a place behind Tuan as the tiny woman sat down on the stool, her face stern and those beautiful big eyes steady. "Hang all the prisoners immediately." "I wish to visit the common room of an inn," she announced. "Or a tavern. I have never seen the inside of either. You will take me to one in this town, Toy." He let himself breathe again. "That's easy enough. Just as soon as Tom or Julian lets me know it's safe." "It must be a low place. What is called a hell." His mouth fell open. Low? Hells were the lowest of the low. Dirty and dimly lit, where the ale and wine were cheap and still not worth half what you paid. The food was worse, and any woman who sat on your lap was trying to pick your pocket or cut your purse, or else had two men waiting upstairs to crack you over the head as soon as you walked into her room. At any hour of the day or night, you would find dice rolling in a dozen games, sometimes for surprising stakes given the surroundings. Not gold, only a stone fool displayed gold in the hell, but silver often crossed the tables. Few of the gamblers would have come by their coin by any means even halfway honest, and those few would be as hard-eyed as the head crackers and knifemen who preyed on drunks in the night. Hells always had 2 or 3 strong arms with cudgels about to break up fights, and most days they worked hard for their pay. They usually stopped the patrons from killing one another, but when they failed, the corpse was dragged out the back and left in an alley somewhere or on a rubbish heap. And while they were dragging, the drinking never slowed, or the gambling either. That was a hell. How had she even heard of such places? "Did you plant this fool notion in her head?" he demanded of Satala. "Why, what in the light makes you think that?" she replied, going all wide-eyed the way women did when pretending to be innocent, or when they wanted you to think they were pretending, just to confuse you. He could not see why they bothered. Women confused him all the time, without trying. "It's out of the question, precious. I walk into a hell with a woman like you, and I'll be in 6 knife fights inside the hour, if I survive that long." Tuan gave a pleased smile. Just a flicker, but definitely pleased. "Do you really think so?" "I know so for a fact." Which produced another brief smile of delight. Delight! The bloody woman wanted to see him in a knife fight. "Even so, Toy, you promised." They were arguing over whether he had made a promise, while he was calmly presenting a logic that saying something was easy was no promise. Tuan just stubbornly insisted he had promised, while Satala took up her embroidery hoop, and Selucia watched him with the amused air of someone watching a man try to defend the indefensible. And he did not shout, no matter what Tuan said, when a knock came at the door. Tuan paused. "You see, Toy," she said after a moment, "that is how it is done. You knock, and then wait." She made a simple gesture over one shoulder at her maid. "You may enter the presence," Selucia called, drawing herself up regally. She probably expected whoever came in to prostrate themselves. It was Tom, in a dark blue coat and dark gray cloak that would make him unremarked in any common room or tavern, neither well-to-do nor poor. A man who could afford to pay for his own drink while listening to the gossip, or buy another man a cup of wine to pay for hearing his news and the latest rumors. He did not prostrate himself, but he did make an elegant bow despite his bad right leg. "My lady," he murmured to Tuan before turning his attention to Matt. Harnan said he saw you strolling this way. I trust I'm not interrupting. I heard voices. Matt scowled. He had not been shouting. You're not interrupting? What did you find out? That there may be Shonchan in a town from time to time. No soldiers, but it seems they're building 2 farm villages a few miles to the north of the road and 3 more a few miles south. The villagers come to town to buy things now and then. Matt managed to keep from smiling as he spoke over his shoulder. He even got a smattering of regret into his voice. I'm afraid there's no jaunt into Mandarin for you, precious. Too dangerous. Tuan folded her arms, emphasizing her bosom. There were more curves to her than he had once thought. Not like Selucia, certainly, but nice curves. Farmer's toy, she drawled dismissively. No farmer has ever seen my face. You promised me a tavern or a common room, and you won't escape on this puny excuse. A common room should present no difficulties, Tom said. It's a pair of scissors or a new pot these farmers are after, not drink. They make their own ale, it seems, and don't much like the local brew. Thank you, Tom, Matt said through gritted teeth. She wants to see a hell. The white-haired man gave a wheezing cough and knuckled his mustaches vigorously. A hell? He muttered. A hell. Do you know a hell in this town where I might take her without starting a riot? He intended the question for sarcasm, but Tom surprised him by nodding. I might just know a place at that, the man said slowly. The White Ring. I intend to go there anyway, to see what news I can pick up. Matt blinked. However unremarked Tom might be elsewhere, he would be looked at askance in a hell wearing that coat. More than askance. The usual garb there was coarse, dirty wool and stained linen. Besides, asking questions in a hell was a good way to have a knife planted in your back. But maybe Tom meant that this White Ring was not a hell at all. Tuan might not know the difference if the place were only a little rougher than the usual. Should I get Harnan and the others? He asked, testing. Oh, I think you and I should be protection enough for the lady, Tom said, with what might have been the ghost of a smile, and knots loosened in Matt's shoulders. He still cautioned the 2 women. There was no question of Selucia staying behind, of course. Mistress Harnan refused Tuan's invitation to accompany them, saying she had already seen as many hells as she had any wish to, about keeping their hoods well up. Tuan might believe no farmer had ever seen her face, but if a cat could gaze on a king, as the old saying said, then a farmer might have gazed on Tuan some day or other, and it would be just their luck to have 1 or 2 of them turn up in Mandarin. Being Taviran usually seemed to twist the pattern for the worst in his experience. Toy, Tuan said gently, as Selucia settled the blue cloak on her slim shoulders. I have met many farmers while visiting the country, but they very properly kept their eyes on the ground, even if I allowed them to stand. Believe me, they never saw my face. Oh. He went to fetch his own cloak and his hat. White clouds nearly obscured the sun, still short of its midday peak, and it was a brisk day for spring, with a strong breeze to boot. People from the town crowded the main street of the show, men in rough woolens or sober coats of finer stuff with just a touch of embroidery on the cuffs. Women, many wearing lace caps and somber collared dresses beneath long white aprons, or dark high-necked dresses with embroidery curling across the bosom. Children darting everywhere, escaping their parents and being chased down, all of them oohing and eyeing at Miora's leopards or Latel's bears, at the jugglers or Balat and Avar eating fire, the lean brothers moving in unison. Not pausing for so much as a glimpse of the female acrobats, Matt threaded through the throng with Tuan on his arm, which he assured by placing her hand on his left wrist. She hesitated a moment, then nodded slightly, a queen giving assent to a peasant. Tom had offered his arm to Selucia, but she stayed at her mistress's left shoulder. At least she did not try to crowd between. Luca, in scarlet coat and cloak, was beneath the big banner at the entrance, watching coins clink into the glass pitcher, clink again as they were dropped into the strongbox. He wore a smile on his face. The line waiting to get in stretched near 100 paces along the canvas wall, and more people were trickling out of the town, heading toward the show. "I could take in a fine bit here over 2 or 3 days," he told Matt. "After all, this place is solid, and we're far enough from—" His smile flickered out like a snuffed candle. "You think we're far enough, don't you?" Matt sighed. Gold would defeat fear every time in Valenluca. He could not hold his cloak closed with Tuam on his arm, so it flared behind him in the stiff breeze, yet that was to the good. The gate guards, slouching in a ragged line, eyed them curiously, and one made a sketchy bow. Silk and lace had that effect, with country armsmen at least, and that was what these men were, no matter how brightly they had burnished their helmets and coin armor coats. Most leaned on their halberds like farmers leaning on shovels. But Tom stopped, and Matt was forced to halt too, a few paces into the town. After all, he had no idea where the White Ring lay. "A heavy guard, Captain," Tom said, worry touching his voice. "Are there brigands in the area?" "No outlaws around here," a grizzled guard said gruffly. A puckered white scar slanting across his square face combined with a squint to give him a villainous appearance. He was not one of the leaners, and he held his halberd as if he might know how to use it. "The Shanshan cleaned out the few we hadn't caught. Move along now, old fellow. You're blocking the way." There was not a wagon or cart in sight, and the few people leaving the town afoot had plenty of room. The gate arch was wide enough for 2 wagons abreast, or it might be a squeeze. "The Shanshan said we didn't set enough guards," a stocky fellow about Matt's age put in cheerfully. "And Lord Nathan listens close when the Shanshan talk." The grizzled man clouted him with a gauntleted hand on the back of his helmet, hard enough to stagger him. "You watch your mouth with people from off, Kyler," the older man growled. "Else you'll be backed behind a plow before you can blink. My lord," he added to Matt, raising his voice, "you want to call your servant before he gets himself in trouble?" "My apologies, Captain," Tom said humbly, ducking his white head, the very image of a chastened serving man. "No offense meant. My apologies." "He would have thumped you too if I hadn't been there," Matt told him when he caught up. Tom was limping noticeably. He must have been tired for it to show that much. "He almost did anyway. And what did you learn that was worth risking that?" "I wouldn't have asked without you in that coat," Tom chuckled as they walked deeper into the town. "The first lesson is what questions to ask. The second, and just as important, is when and how to ask. I learned there aren't any brigands, which is always good to know, though I've heard of very few bands big enough to attack something as large as the show. I learned Nathan is under the Shanshan thumb. Either he's obeying a command with those extra guards, or he takes their suggestions as commands. And most important, I learned that Nathan's armsmen don't resent the Shanshan." Matt quirked an eyebrow at him. "They didn't spit when they said the name, Matt. They didn't grimace or growl. They won't fight the Shanshan, not unless Nathan tells them to, and he won't." Tom exhaled heavily. "It's very strange. I found the same everywhere, from Eludar to here. These outlanders come, take charge, impose their laws, snatch up women who can channel, and if the nobles resent them, very few among the common people seem to, unless they've had wife or relation collared anyway. Very strange, and it bodes ill for getting him out again. But then Altara is Altara. I'll wager they're planning a colder reception in Almadicia and Terabon." He shook his head. "We had best hope they are, else—" He did not say what else, but it was easy to imagine. Matt glanced at Tuan. How did she feel hearing Tom talk about her people so? She said nothing, only walked at his side, peering curiously at everything from the shelter of her cowl. Tile-roofed buildings, 3 and 4 stories tall, most of brick, lined the wide stone-paved main street of Matarin. Shops and inns with signs that swung in the stiff breeze crowded into side stables and rich people's homes with large lamps above the arched doorways, and humbler structures that housed poorer folk, by the laundry hanging from nearly every window. Horse carts and hand barrows, laden with bales or crates or barrels, slowly made their way through a moderately thick throng, men and women with brisk strides, full of that storied southern industry, children dashing about in games of catch. Tuan studied it all with equal interest. A fellow pushing a wheeled grindstone and crying that he sharpened scissors or knives till they could cut wishes caught her attention as much as a lean, hard-faced woman in leather trousers with two swords strapped to her back. Doubtless a merchant's guard or perhaps a hunter for the horn, but a rarity either way. A buxom Damani in a clinging red dress that fell just short of transparent, with a pair of bulky bodyguards and scale armor jerkins at her back, had neither more nor less study than a lanky one-eyed fellow in frayed wool hawking pins, needles, and ribbons from a tray. He had not noticed this sort of curiosity from her in Jurador, but she had been intent on finding silk in Jurador. Here, she seemed to be trying to memorize all she saw. Tom soon led them off into a maze of twisting streets, most of which deserved the name only because they were paved with rough stone blocks the size of a man's two fists. Buildings as big as those on the main street, some housing shops on the ground floor, loomed over them, almost shutting out the sky. Many of those ways were too narrow for horse carts, and some Matt would not have had to extend his arms fully to touch the walls on either side. And more than once he had to press Tuan against the front of a building to let a heavy-loaded hand barrow rumble past over the uneven paving stones, the barrow man calling apologies for the inconvenience without slowing. Porters trudged through that cramped warren too, men walking bent nearly parallel to the ground, each with a bale or crate on his back held level by a padded leather roll strapped to his hips. Just the sight of them made Matt's own back ache. They reminded him how much he hated work. He was on the point of asking Tom how far they had to go. Matarin was not that big a town. When they reached the White Ring, on one of those winding streets where his arms could more than compass the width of the pavement, a brick building of 3 floors across from a cutler's shop. The painted sign hanging over the inn's red door, a frilly white circle of lace, made the knots return to his shoulders. Ring, it might be called, but that was a woman's garter if he ever had seen one. It might not be a hell, but inns with signs like that usually were rowdy enough in their own right. He eased the knives up his coat sleeves and those in his boot tops as well, felt the blades under his coat, shrugged just to get the feel of the one hanging behind his neck. Though if it went that far, Tuan nodded approvingly. The bloody woman was dying to see him get into a knife fight. Selusha had the sense to frown. "Ah, yes," Tom said, "a wise precaution." And he checked his own knives, tightening those knots in Matt's shoulders a little more. Tom carried almost as many blades as he did, up his sleeves, beneath his coat. Selusha writhed her fingers at Tuan, and suddenly they were in a silent argument, fingers flashing. Of course, it could not be that. Tuan bloody well owned Selusha, the same as owning a dog, and you did not argue with your dog. But an argument it seemed, both women with their jaws set stubbornly. Finally, Selusha folded her hands and bowed her head in acquiescence. A reluctant submission. "It will be well," Tuan told her in a jollying tone. "You will see. It will be well." Matt wished he was sure of that. Taking a deep breath, he extended his wrist for her hand again and followed Tom. The spacious, wood-paneled common room of the White Ring held better than 24 men and women, nearly half obvious outlanders, at square tables beneath a thick-beamed ceiling. All neatly dressed in finely woven wool, with little by way of ornamentation, most were talking quietly over their wine in pairs, cloaks draped over their low-backed chairs, though 3 men and a woman with long beaded braids were tossing bright red dice from a wine cup at one table. Pleasant smells drifted from the kitchen, including meat roasting, goat most likely. Beside the wide stone fireplace, where a parsimonious fire burned, and a polished brass barrel clock sat on the mantel, a saucy-eyed young woman who rivaled Selusha, and with her blouse unlaced nearly to her waist to prove it, swayed her hips and sang, accompanied by a hammered dulcimer and a flute, a song about a woman juggling all of her lovers. She sang in a suitably bawdy voice,
None of the patrons appeared to be listening. As I walked out one fine spring day, I met young Jack, who was pitching hay. His hair so fair and his eyes were too. Well, I gave him a kiss. Oh, what could I do? We snuggled and we tickled while the sun rose high, and I won't say how often he made me sigh. Lowering her hood, Tuan stopped just inside the door and frowned around the room. "Are you certain this is a hell, Master Merlin?" she asked, in a low voice, faint but light. Some places a question of that sort could get you thrown out, and roughly, silk coat or no. In others, the prices just doubled. "I assure you, you won't find a bigger collection of thieves and rascals anywhere in Maverick at this hour," Tom murmured, stroking his mustaches.
No.
"Now Jack gets an hour when the sky is clear, and Willie gets an hour when my father's not near. It's the hayloft with Moral, where he shows no fear, and Kylan comes at midday. He's oh so bold. Lord Brellan gets an evening when the night is cold.
One
Master
second, I
Andrew
gotta go
gets a
grab my
morning, but
pillow.
he's
Okay.
very old. Oh, what is a poor girl to do? My loves are so many and the hours so few." Tuan looked doubtful, but with Selucia at her shoulder, she walked over to stand in front of the singer, who faltered a moment at Tuan's intense scrutiny before catching the song up again. She sang over the top of Tuan's head, plainly attempting to ignore her. It seemed that with every other verse, the woman in the song added a new lover to her list. The male musician, playing the dulcimer, smiled at Selucia and got a frosty stare back. The two women got other looks as well, the one so small and with very short black hair, the other rivaling the singer, and with her head wrapped in a scarf, but no more than glances. The patrons were intent on their own business. "It isn't a hell," Matt said softly, "but what is it? Why would so many people be here in the middle of the day?" It was mornings and evenings when common rooms filled up like this. "The locals are selling olive oil, lacquerware, or lace," Tom replied just as quietly. "The outlanders are buying. It seems local custom is to begin with a few hours of drink and conversation. And if you have no head for it," he added dryly, "you sober up to find you've made much less of a bargain than you thought in your wine." "Mike, Tom, she'll never believe this place is a hell. I thought you were taking us somewhere merchants' guards drink, or apprentices. At least she might believe that." "Trust me, Matt, I think you'll find she has lived a very sheltered life in some ways." "Sheltered? When her own brothers and sisters tried to kill her. You wouldn't care to wager a crown on it, would you?" Tom chuckled. "Always glad to take your coin." Tuan and Selucia came gliding back, faces expressionless. "I expected rougher garb on the patrons," Tuan said quietly, "and perhaps a fight or two, but the song is too salacious for a respectable inn, though she is much too covered to sing it properly, in my opinion. What is that for?" she added in tones of suspicion as Matt handed Tom a coin. "Oh," Tom said, slipping the crown into his coat pocket, "I thought you might be disappointed that only the more successful blackguards were present. They aren't always as powerful as the poorer sort. But Matt said you'd never notice." She leveled a look at Matt, who opened his mouth indignantly and closed it again. What was there to say? He was already in the pickling kettle. No need to stoke the fire. As the innkeeper approached, a round woman with suspiciously black hair beneath a white lace cap, stuffed into a gray dress embroidered in red and green across her more than ample bosom, Tom slipped away with a bow and murmured, "By your leave, my lord, lady." Murmured, but loud enough for Mistress Highland to hear. The innkeeper had a flinty smile, yet she exercised it for a lord and lady, curtsying so deeply that she grunted, straightening back up. And she seemed only a little disappointed that Matt wanted wine and perhaps food, not rooms. Her best wine. Even so, when he paid, he let her see that he had gold in his purse as well as silver. A silk coat was all very well, but gold-wearing rags got better service than copper-wearing silk. "Ale," Tuan drawled. "I've never tasted ale. Tell me, good mistress, is it likely any of these people will start a fight any time soon?" Matt nearly swallowed his tongue.
Mistress Highland blinked and gave her head a small shake, as if uncertain she really had heard what she thought she had. "No need to worry, my lady," she said. "It happens time to time if they get too far in their cups. But I'll settle them down hard if it does." "Not on my account," Tuan told her. "They should have their sport." The innkeeper's smile went crooked and barely held, but she managed another curtsy, then scurried away, clutching Matt's coin, going, "Jera, wine for the lord and lady, a pitcher of Caranile, and a mug of ale." "You mustn't ask questions like that, precious," Matt said quietly as he escorted Tuan and Solutia to an empty table. Solutia refused a chair, taking Tuan's cloak and draping it over the chair she held for Tuan, then standing behind it. "It isn't polite. Besides, it lowers your eyes." Thank the light for those talks with the Gainan, whatever name she wanted to go by. Shan Chen would do any fool thing or refuse to do what was sensible to avoid having their eyes lowered. Tuan nodded thoughtfully. "Your customs are often very peculiar, Toei. You will have to teach me about them. I have learned some, but I must know the customs of the people I will rule in the name of the Empress. May she live forever." "I'll be glad to teach you what I can," Matt said, unpinning his cloak and letting it fall carelessly over the low back of his chair. "It will be good for you to know our ways, even if you end up ruling a sight less than you expect to." He set his hat on the table. Tuan and Solutia gasped as one, hands darting for the hat. Tuan's reached it first, and she quickly put it on the chair next to her. "That is very bad luck, Toy. Never put a hat on a table." She made one of those odd gestures for warding off evil, holding under the middle two fingers and extending the other two stiffly. Solutia did the same. "I'll remember that," he said dryly. Perhaps too dryly. Tuan gave him a level look. Very level. "I have decided you will not do for a cupbearer, Toy. Not until you learn meekness, which I almost despair of teaching you. Perhaps I will make you a running groom instead. You are good with horses. Would you like trotting at my stirrup when I ride? The robes are much the same as for a cupbearer, but I will have yours decorated with ribbons. Pink ribbons." He managed to maintain a smooth face, but he felt his cheeks growing hot. There was only one way she could know pink ribbons had any special significance to him. Highland had
Number
told her.
one.
It had to be. Burn him, women would talk about anything. The arrival of the serving maid with their drink saved him from having to make any response. Jera was a smiling young woman with nearly as many curves as the singer, not so well displayed, yet not really concealed by the white apron she wore tied snugly. Her dark woolen dress fit quite snugly, too. Not that he gave her more than a glance, of course. He was with his wife-to-be. Anyway, only a complete woolhead looked at a woman while with another. Jera placed a tall pewter wine pitcher and two polished pewter cups on the table, and handed a thick mug of ale to Solutia, then blinked in confusion when Solutia transferred the mug to Tuan and took a cup of wine in return. He handed her a silver penny to settle her discomposure, and she gave him a beaming smile with her curtsy before darting off to another call from the innkeeper. It was unlikely she received much in the way of silver. "You could have smiled back at her, Toy," Tuan said, holding the mug up for a sniff and wrinkling her nose. "She is very pretty. You were so stone-faced, you probably frightened her." She took a sip, and her eyes widened in surprise. "This is actually quite good." Matt sighed and took a long swallow of dark wine that smelled faintly of flowers. In none of his memories, his own or those other men's, could he recall having understood women. Oh, one or two things here and there, but never anywhere near
Oh, yeah.
completely.
Cheers, fire.
Sipping her ale steadily, he was not about to tell her ale was taken in swallows, not sips. She might get herself drunk deliberately just to experience a hell fully. He was not ready to put anything past her today. Or any day. Taking sips between every sentence, the maddening little woman questioned him on customs. Telling her how to behave in a hell was easy enough. Keep to yourself, ask no questions, and sit with your back to a wall if you could, and near to a door in case of a need to leave suddenly. Better not to go at all, but if you had to. Yet she quickly passed on to courts and palaces, and got few answers there. He could have told her more of customs in the courts of Aharon, of Shiota, or a dozen other dead nations, than in those of any nation that still lived. Scraps of how things were done in Camelin and Tyr were all he really knew, and bits from Faldar and Shinar. Well, that and Etudar, but she already knew those ways. So you have traveled widely and been in other palaces than the Tarasen, she said finally, and took the last bit of ale in her mug. He had not finished half his wine yet. He thought Selucia had not taken above 2 small swallows of hers. But you are not nobly born, it seems. I thought you must not be. That I am not, he told her firmly. Nobles, he trailed off, clearing his throat. He could hardly tell her nobles were fools with their noses so high in the air they could not see where they were stepping. She was who and what she was, after all. Expressionless, Tuon studied him while pushing her empty mug to one side. Still studying, she flickered the fingers of her left hand over her shoulder, and Selucia clapped her own hands together loudly. Several of the other patrons looked at them in surprise. You called yourself a gambler, Tuon said, and Master Merlin named you the luckiest man in the world. Jera came running, and Selucia handed her the mug. Another, quickly, she commanded, though not in an unkindly way. Still, she had a regal manner to her. Jera dropped a hasty curtsy and scurried off again as though she had been shouted at. I have luck sometimes, Matt said cautiously. Let's see whether you have any today, Toy. Tuon looked toward the table where the dice were rattling on the tabletop. He could see no harm in it. It was a certainty he would win more than he lost, yet he thought it unlikely one of the merchants would pull a knife, however much his luck was in. He had not noticed anyone carrying one of those long belt knives that everybody wore farther south. Standing, he offered Tuon his arm, and she rested her hand lightly on his wrist. Selucia left her wine on the table and stayed close to her mistress. 2 of the Altaran men, one lean and bald except for a dark fringe, the other round-faced above 3 chins, scowled when he asked whether a stranger might join the game, and the third, a graying, stocky fellow with a pendulous lower lip, went stiff as a fence post. The Tarabonner woman was not so unfriendly. Of course, why not, she said, her speech slightly slurred. Her face was flushed, and the smile she directed at him had a slackness about it. Apparently, she was one of those with no head for wine. It seemed the locals wanted to keep her happy because the scowls vanished, though the graying man remained wooden-faced. Matt fetched chairs from a nearby table for himself and Tuon. Selucia chose to remain standing behind Tuon, which was just as well. 6 people crowded the table. Jera arrived to curtsy and proffer a refilled mug to Tuon with both hands and a murmured "milady," and another serving woman, graying and nearly as stout as Mistress Highland, replaced the wine pitcher on the gambler's table. Smiling, the bald man filled the Tarabonner's cup to the brim. They wanted her happy and drunk. She drained half the cup and with a laugh wiped her lips delicately with a lace-edged handkerchief. Getting it back up her sleeve required 2 tries. She would come away with no good bargains this day. Matt watched a little play and soon recognized the game. It used 4 dice rather than 2, but without a doubt it was a version of Piri, Match, a game that had been popular for 1,000 years before Utter Hawkling began his rise. Small piles of silver had mixed with a few gold coins lay in front of each of the players, and it was a silver mark that he laid in the middle of the table to buy the dice, while the stout man was gathering his winnings from the last toss. He expected no trouble from merchants, but trouble was less likely if they lost silver rather than gold. The lean man matched the wager, and Matt rattled the crimson dice in the pewter cup, then spun them out onto the table. They came to rest showing 4 5s. Is that the winning toss? Tuon asked. Not unless I match it, Matt replied, scooping the dice back into the cup, without tossing a 14 or the dark one's eyes first. The dice clattered in the cup, clattered across the table. 4 5s. His luck was in for sure. He slid one silver coin over in front of himself and left the other. Abruptly, the graying fellow scraped back his chair and stood up. "I've had enough," he muttered, and began fumbling the coins in front of him into his coat pockets. The other 2 Altarans stared at him incredulously. "You're leaving, then?" the lean man said. "Now?" "I said I've had enough, Cameron," the graying man growled, and went stumping out into the street, pursued by Cameron's scowl at his back. The Terrabonner woman leaned over unsteadily, her beaded braids clicking on the tabletop, to pat the fat man's wrist. "Just means I'll buy my lacquerware from you, Master Costell," she said fuzzily. "You and Master Cameron." Costell's triple chins wobbled as he chuckled. "So it does, Mistress Alstane. So it does. Doesn't it, Cameron?" "I suppose," the bald man replied gruffly. "I suppose." He shoved a mark out to match Matt's. Once again the dice spun across the table. This time they came up totaling 14. "Oh," Tuan said, sounding disappointed. "You lost." "I won, Precious. That's a winning toss if it's your first." He left his original bet in the middle of the table. "Another?" he said with a grin. His luck was in all right, as strong as it had ever been. The bright red dice rolled across the table, ricocheted across the table, bounced off the wagered coins sometimes, and toss after toss they came to rest, showing 14 white pips. He made 14 every way it could be made. Even at 1 coin to a wager, the silver in front of him grew to a tidy sum. Half the people in the common room came to stand around the table and watch. He grinned at Tuan, who gave him a slight nod. He had missed this, dice in a common room or tavern, going on a table, wondering how long his luck would hold, and a pretty woman at his side while he gambled. He wanted to laugh with pleasure. As he was shaking the dice in the cup again, the Terrabonner merchant glanced at him, and for an instant she did not look drunk at all. Suddenly, he no longer felt like laughing. Her face slackened immediately, and her eyes became a tad unfocused once more, but for that instant they had been alls. She had a much better head for wine than he had supposed. It seemed Cameron and Costell would not get away with fobbing off shoddy work at top prices or whatever their scheme had been. What concerned him, though, was that the woman was suspicious of him. Come to think, she herself had not risked a coin against him. The 2 Altarans were frowning at him, but just the way men who were losing frowned over their bad luck. She thought he had found some way to cheat. Never mind that he was using their dice, or more likely the inn's dice. An accusation of cheating could get a man a drubbing, even in a merchant's inn. Men seldom waited on proof of that charge. "One last toss," he said, "and I think I'll call it done. Mistress Highland?" The innkeeper was among the onlookers. He handed her a small handful of his new 1 silver coins. "To celebrate my good fortune, serve everybody what they want to drink until those run out." That brought appreciative murmurs, and someone behind him clapped him on the back. A man drinking your wine was less likely to believe you had bought it with cheated coin. Or at least they might hesitate long enough to give him a chance to get Tuan out. "He can't keep this run going forever," Cameron muttered, scrubbing a hand through the hair he no longer possessed. "What say you, Costell? Halves?" Fingering a gold crown free of the coins piled in front of him, he slid it over beside Matt's silver mark. "If there's only to be one more toss, let's make a real wager on it. Bad luck has to follow this much good." Costell hesitated, rubbing his chins in thought, then nodded and added a gold crown of his own. Matt sighed. He could refuse the bet, but walking away now might well trigger Mistress Alstane's charge. So could winning this toss. Reluctantly, he pushed out silver marks to match their gold. That left only 2 in front of him. He gave the cup an extra heavy shake before spilling the dice onto the table. He did not expect that to alter anything. He was just venting his feelings. The red dice tumbled across the tabletop, hit the piled coins, and bounced back, spinning before they fell to a stop, each showing a single pip. The Dark One's eyes. Laughing just as if it were not just their own coin won back, Cameron and Costell began dividing their winnings. The watchers started drifting away, calling congratulations to the two merchants, murmuring words of commiseration to Matt, some lifting the cup he was paying for in his direction. Mistress Alstang took a long pull on her wine cup, studying him over the rim, to all outward appearance, as drunk as a goose. He doubted she thought he had been cheating any longer, not when he was walking away with only one mark more than he sat down with. Sometimes bad luck could turn out to be good. So your luck is not endless, Toy, Tuan said as he escorted her back to their table. Or is it that you are lucky only in small things? Nobody has endless luck, Precious. Myself, I think that last toss was one of the luckiest I've ever made. He explained about the Tarabana woman's suspicions and why he had bought wine for the whole common room. At the table, he held her chair for her, but she remained standing, looking at him. You may do very well in Shandar, she said finally, thrusting her nearly empty mug at him. Guard this until I return. He straightened in alarm. Where are you going? He trusted her not to run away, but not to stay out of trouble without him there to pull her out of it. She put on a long, suffering face. Even that was beautiful. If you must know, I am going to the necessary, Toy. Oh, the innkeeper can tell you where it is, or one of the serving women. Thank you, Toy, she said sweetly. I'd never have thought to ask. She waggled her fingers at Solutia, and the two of them walked toward the back of the common room, having one of their silent talks and giggling. Sitting down, he scowled into his wine cup. Women seem to enjoy finding ways to make you feel a fool, and he was half married to this one. Where are the women? Tom asked, dropping down into the chair beside Matt and setting a nearly full wine cup on the table. He grunted when Matt explained, and went on in a low voice, leaning his elbows on the table to put his head close. We have trouble behind and ahead. Far enough ahead that it may not bother us here, but best we leave as soon as they return. Matt sat up straight. What kind of trouble? Some of those merchant trains that passed us the last few days brought news of a murder in Jurador about the time we left. Maybe a day or two later. It's hard to be sure. A man was found in his own bed with his throat ripped. Only there wasn't enough blood. He had no need to say more. Matt took a long pull at his wine. The bloody Golan was still following him. How had it found out he was with Luca's show? But if it was still a day or two behind at the pace the show was making, likely it would not catch up to him soon. He fingered the silver fox head through his coat. At least he had a way to fight it if it did appear. The thing carried a scar he had given it. And the trouble ahead? There's a Shongchen army on the border of Nuremberg. How they assembled it without my learning about it before this. He puffed out his mustaches, offended by his failure. Well, no matter. Everybody who passes through, they make drink a cup of some herbal tea. Tea? Matt said in disbelief. Where's the trouble in tea? Every so often this tea makes a woman go unsteady in her legs, and then the Suldam come and collar her. But that's not the worst. They're looking very hard for a slight, dark, young Shongchan woman. Well, of course they are. Did you expect they wouldn't be? This solves my biggest problem, Tom. When we get closer, we can leave the show, take to the forest. Tuan and Solutia can travel on with Luca. Luca will like being the hero who returned their daughter of the 9 moons to them. Tom shook his head gravely. They're looking for an imposter, Matt. Somebody claiming to be the daughter of the 9 moons. Or maybe someone who already has. Except the description fits her too closely. They don't talk about it openly, but there are always men who drink too much, and some always talk too much as well when they do. They mean to kill her when they find her. Something about blotting out the shame she caused. Right, Matt breathed. How could that be, Tom? Whatever general commands that army must know her face, wouldn't he? And other officers too, I think. There must be nobles who know her. Won't do her much good if they do. Even the lowest soldier will slit her throat or bash in her head as soon as she's found. I had that from 3 different merchants, Matt. Even if they're all wrong, are you willing to take the chance? Matt was not, and over their wine they began planning. Not that they did much drinking. Tom seldom did any more for all his visits to common rooms and taverns, and Matt wanted a clear head. Luca will scream over letting us have enough horses to mount everyone whatever you pay him, Tom said at one point. And there are pack horses for supplies if we're taking to the forest. Then I'll start buying, Tom. By the time we have to go, we'll have as many as we need. I'll wager I can find a few good animals right here. Bannon has a good eye, too. Don't worry, I'll make sure he pays for them. Tom nodded doubtfully. He was not so certain how reformed Bannon was. Eludra's coming with us, the white-haired man said in surprise a little later. She'll want to take all her paraphernalia. That'll mean more pack horses. We have time, Tom. The border of Nurundi is a long way yet. I mean to head north into Andor, or east if Bannon knows a way through the mountains. Better east. Any way Bannon knew would be a smuggler's path, a horse thief's escape route. There would be much less chance of unfortunate encounters along something like that. The Shonchan could be almost anywhere in Altara, and the way north took him nearer that army than he liked. Tuon and Selucia appeared from the back of the common room, and he stood, taking up Tuon's cloak from her chair. Tom rose too, lifting Selucia's cloak. We're leaving, Matt said, trying to place the cloak around Tuon. Selucia snatched it out of his hands. I haven't even seen one fight yet, Tuon protested, too loudly. Any number of people turned to stare, merchants and serving women. I'll explain outside, he told her quietly, away from prying ears. Tuon stared up at him expressionless. He knew she was tough, but she was so tiny, like a pretty doll, that it was easy to believe she would break if handled roughly. He was going to do whatever was necessary to make sure she was not put in danger of being broken, whatever it took. Finally, she nodded and let Selucia place the blue cloak on her shoulders. Tom attempted to do the same for the yellow-haired woman, but she took it away from him and donned it herself. Matt could not recall ever seeing her let anyone help her with her cloak. The crooked street outside was empty of human life. A slat-ribbed brown dog eyed them warily, then trotted away around the nearest bend. Matt moved nearly as quickly in the other direction, explaining as they went. If he had expected shock or dismay, he would have been disappointed. It could be Ravashi or Chima, the little woman said thoughtfully, as if having an entire Shonchan army out to kill her were no more than an idle distraction. My 2 nearest sisters in age. Our Rana is too young, I think, only 8. 14, you would say. Chima is quiet in her ambition, but Ravashi has always believed she should be named just because she is older. She might well have sent someone to plant rumors should I disappear for a time. It is really quite clever of her, if she is the one. Just as coolly as talking about whether it might rain. This plot could be dealt with easily if the High Lady were in the Terrasen Palace where she belongs, Selucia said, and coolness vanished from Tuon. Oh, her face became as chill as that of an executioner when she rounded on her maid, fingers flashing so furiously they should have been striking sparks. Selucia's face went pale, and she sank to her knees, head down and huddling. Her fingers gestured briefly, and Tuon let her own hands fall, stood looking down at the scarf-covered top of Selucia's head, breathing heavily. After a moment, she bent and lifted the other woman to her feet. Standing very close, she said something very short in that finger talk. Selucia replied silently. Tuon made the same gestures again, and they exchanged tremulous smiles. Tears glistened in their eyes. Tears. Will you tell me what that was all about? Matt demanded. They turned their heads to study him. What are your plans, Toy? Tuon asked at last. Not Abu Dar, if that's what you're thinking, precious. If one army is out to kill you, then they probably all are. And there are too many soldiers between here and Abu Dar. But don't worry. I'll find some way to get you back safely. So you always... Her eyes went past him, widening, and he looked over his shoulder to see 7 or 8 men round the last bend in the street. Every man had an unsheathed sword in his hand. Their steps quickened at sight of him. "Run, Tuan!" he shouted, spinning to face their attackers. "Tom, get her away from here!" A knife came into either hand from his sleeves, and he threw them almost at once. The left-hand blade took a graying man in the eye, the right hand a skinny fellow in the throat. They dropped as if their bones had melted, but before their swords clattered on the paving stones, he had already snatched another pair of knives from his boot tops and was sprinting toward them. It took them by surprise, losing 2 of their number so quickly and him closing the distance instead of trying to flee. But with him so close so quickly, and them jamming against one another on that narrow street, they lost most of the advantage that swords gave them over his knives. Not all, unfortunately. His blades could deflect a sword, but he only bothered when someone drew back for a
Can't
thrust.
complain too much.
In short order, he had a fine collection of gashes across his ribs, on his left thigh, along the right side of his jaw, a cut that would have laid open his throat had he not jerked aside in time. But had he tried to flee, they would have run him through from behind. Alive and bleeding was better than dead. His hands moved as fast as they ever had, short moves, almost delicate. Flamboyance would have killed him. One knife slipped into a fat man's heart and out again before the fellow's knees began to crumple. He sliced inside the elbow of a man built like a blacksmith, who dropped his sword and awkwardly drew his belt knife with his left hand. Matt ignored him. The fellow was already staggering from blood loss before his blade cleared the scabbard. A square-faced man gasped as Matt sliced open the side of his neck. He clapped a hand to the wound, but he only managed to totter back 2 steps before he fell. As men died, the others gained room, but Matt moved faster still, dancing so that a falling man shielded him from another's sword while he closed inside the sword arc of a third. To him, the world consisted of his 2 knives and the men crowding each other to get at him. And his knives sought the places where men bleed most heavily. Some of those ancient memories came from men who had not been very nice at all. And then, miracle of miracles, bleeding profusely, but his blood too hot to let him feel the full pain yet, he was facing the last, one he had not noticed before. She was young and slim in a ragged dress, and she might have been pretty had her face been clean, had her teeth not been showing in a rictus snarl. The dagger she was tossing from hand to hand had a double-edged blade twice the length of his hand. "You can't hope to finish alone with the others
I'll be right back.
together," he told her. "Run. I'll let you go unharmed."
Then we'll smoke that dope.
With a
That
cry
joint.
like a feral cat, she rushed at him, slashing and stabbing wildly. All he could do was dance backwards, awkwardly, trying to fend her off. His boot slid in a patch of blood, and as he staggered, he knew he was about to die. Abruptly, Tuan was there, left hand seizing the young woman's wrist. Not the wrist of her knife hand, worse luck. Twisting, so the arm went stiff and the girl was forced to double over. And then it mattered not at all which hand held her knife, because Tuan's right hand swept across, bladed like an axe, and struck her throat so hard that he heard the cartilage cracking. Choking, she clutched her ruined throat and sagged to her knees, then fell over, still sucking hoarsely for breath. "I told you to run," Matt said, not sure which of the 2 he was addressing. "You very nearly let her kill you, Tony," Tuan said severely. "Why?" "I promised myself I'd never kill another woman," he said wearily. His blood was beginning to cool, and right he hurt. "Looks like I've ruined this coat," he muttered, fingering one of the blood-soaked slashes. The motion brought a wind. When had he been gagged on the left arm? Her gaze seemed to bore into his skull, and she nodded as if she had come to some conclusion. Tom and Solutia were standing a little down the street, in front of the reason Tuan was still there.
Afternoon.
Better than half a dozen bodies sprawled in the paving stones. Tom had a knife in either hand and was allowing Solutia to examine a wound on his ribs through the rent in his coat. Oddly, by the evidence of the dark glistening patches on his coat, he seemed to have fewer injuries. Matt wondered whether Tuan had taken the too, but he could not see a spot of blood on her anywhere. Solutia had a bloody gash down her left arm, though it appeared not to hinder her. "I am an old man," Tom said suddenly, "and sometimes I imagine I see things that can't be. But luckily I always forget them." Solutia paused to look up at him coolly. Lady's maid she might be, but blood seemed not to faze her at all. And what might you be trying to forget? I can't recall, Tom replied. Sir Lucia nodded and went back to examining his wounds. Matt shook his head. Sometimes he was not entirely sure Tom still had all his wits. For that matter, Sir Lucia seemed to shuffle shy of a full load now and then, too. This one can't live to be put to the question, Tuan crawled, frowning at the woman choking and twitching at her feet. And she can't talk if she somehow managed to. Bending fluidly, she scooped up the woman's knife and drove it hard beneath the woman's breastbone. That rasping fight for air went silent. Blazing eyes stared up at the narrow strip of sky overhead. A mercy she did not deserve, but I see no point to needless suffering. I won, Toy. You won? What are you talking about? You used my name before I used yours, so I won. Matt whistled faintly through his teeth. Whenever he thought he knew how tough she was, she found a way to show him he'd not know the half. If anybody happened to be looking out a window, that stabbing might raise questions with the local magistrate, probably Lord Nathan himself. But there were no faces at any window he could see. People avoided getting embroiled in this sort of thing if they could. For all he knew, any number of porters or barrowmen might have come along during the fight. For a certainty, they would have turned right around again as quickly as they could. Whether any might have gone for Lord Nathan's guards was another question. Still, he had no fear of Nathan or his magistrate. A pair of men escorting 2 women did not decide to attack more than a dozen carrying swords. Likely these fellows and the unfortunate young woman were well known to the guards. Limping to retrieve his fine knives, he paused in the act of pulling the blade from the graying man's eye. He had not really taken in that face before. Everything had happened too quickly for more than general impressions. Carefully wiping the knife on the man's coat, he tucked it away up his sleeve as he straightened. Our plans have changed, Tom. We're leaving matter in as fast as we can, and we're leaving the show as fast as we can. Luca will want to be rid of us so much that he'll let us have all the horses we need. This must be reported, Toy, Tuan said severely. Failure to do so is as lawless as what they did. You know that fellow? Tom said. Matt nodded. His name is Vane, and I don't think anybody in this town will believe a respectable merchant attacked us in the street. Luca will give us horses to be rid of this. It was very strange. The man had not lost a coin to him, had not wagered a coin. So why? Very strange indeed, and reason enough to be gone quickly. Chapter 12. A Manufactory. The midday Amadisian sun was warm on Perrin's head as he rode stair toward the roofs of Almazar, beneath high scudding white clouds, 100 miles southwest of Amador. Impatient, he kept the bay at a trot. Farms stretched as far as he could see in any direction on both sides of the road, thatch-roofed stone houses with gray smoke rising from the chimneys and chickens scratching in front of the barns. Fat-tailed sheep and spotted black cattle grazed in stone-walled pastures, and men and boys were plowing the fields or sowing those already plowed. It seemed to be laundry day. He could see large kettles sitting over fires behind houses, and women and girls hanging shirts and blouses and bed linens on long lines to dry. There was little of wildness, only scattered thickets, and most of those neatly compassed with dried firewood. He reached out with his mind to find wolves, and found nothing. Unsurprising, wolves stayed clear of this many people, this much tameness. The breeze stiffened, and he gathered his cloak around him. Despite the need to make a show, it was plain brown wool. The only silk cloak he had was lined with fur, and too hot for the day. His green silk coat, worked in silver, would have to do. That and his cloak pin, 2 wolves' heads in silver and gold. A gift from Fail, it had always seemed too ornate to wear, but he had dug it out of the bottom of a chest that morning, a little something to make up for the plain cloak. What was surprising were the tinker caravans camped in fields scattered around the town, 5 of them within his sight. According to Elias, there was always feasting when 2 caravans encountered one another, and a meeting of 3 caused days of celebration. But larger gatherings seldom occurred except in the summer, at Sunday, when they had their meeting places. He almost wished he had brought Aram, despite the risk of Massima learning too much. Maybe if the man could spend a little time among his own people, he might decide to put down his sword. That was the best solution Perrin could think of to a thorny problem, although not likely to work. Aram liked the sword, perhaps too well, but he could not send the man away. He had as good as put that sword in Aram's hand, and now Aram and the sword were his responsibility. The light only knew what would become of the man if he truly went over to Massima. You studied the Tuathron and frowned, my lord, General Kirgan drawled. He could understand her speech a little better now that they had spent some time together. You've had problems with them in your lands? We have nothing like them at home, but the only trouble connected to them I know of has been locals trying to drive them away. Apparently, they're supposed to be great thieves. She and Mishima were ornate today in blue cloaks trimmed with red and yellow, and red coats with blue cuffs and lapels edged in yellow. 3 small vertical blue bars, shaped like the thin plumes of a Shongshan helmet, on the left breast of her coat indicated her rank, as 2 did for Mishima. The dozen soldiers riding behind wore their striped armor and painted helmets, however, and carried steel-tipped lances held at precisely the same angle. The cluster of Fail's hangers-on following the Shongshan, also 12 in number, made a brave display in Tyran coats with puffy satin-striped sleeves and dark Karianan coats with stripes of house colors across the chests, yet in spite of their swords they looked much less dangerous than the soldiers and seemed to know it. Whenever the breeze gusted from behind, it carried traces of irritation that Perrin doubted came from the Shongshan. The soldiers' scent was of stillness, waiting, like wolves who knew teeth might be needed soon, but not now. Not yet. They steal a chicken now and then, General, Nield said, with a laugh, giving one of his thin waxed mustaches a twist. But I'd not be calling them great thieves. He had enjoyed the Shongshan astonishment at the gateway that had brought them all here, and he was still posing over it, somehow managing to strut while sitting his saddle. It was difficult to remember that had he not earned that black coat, he would still be working his father's farm and perhaps wondering about marriage to a neighbor girl in a year or 2. Great theft requires courage, and tinkers have not a bit of it. Huddled in his dark cloak, Bulwer grimaced, or perhaps smiled. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference with the desiccated little man unless Perrin could catch his scent. The pair of them accompanied Perrin in much the same way as a gray-haired Suldam linked to a cool-eyed Damani with touches of gray in her own dark hair, accompanied Kirgan and Mishima, supposedly to balance the numbers. To the Shongshan, Suldam and Damani counted as one when connected by the segmented metal leash. He would have been satisfied to come with Nield alone, or Nield and Bulwer at least, but Talonvor had been right about Shongshan and protocol. The talks had dragged on for 3 days, and while some time had been spent on whether to follow Perrin's plan or make it a part of something Ty would come up with her yielding at the end only because she could find nothing better, a good part had been wasted on how many each side was to bring here. It had to be the same number for each, and the Banner General had wanted to bring 100 of her soldiers and a pair of the money, for honor's sake. She had been astonished that he was willing to come with less, and was only willing to accept it after he pointed out that everyone among Fail's people was noble in his or her own lands. He had the feeling she thought she had proceeded because she could not match his escort's rank with her own. Strange folk, these Shongshan. Oh, there were sides, to be sure. This alliance was purely temporary, not to mention delicate, and the Banner General was just as aware of that as he. Twice they offered me shelter when I needed it, me and my friends, and asked nothing in return, Perrin said quietly. Yet what I remember best about them was when Trollocs surrounded Emond's field. The Tuathalan stood on the green with children strapped to their backs. The few of their own had survived, and ours. They would not fight. It isn't their way. But if the Trollocs overran us, they were ready to try to carry the children to safety. Carrying our children would have hampered them, made escape even less likely than it already was. But they asked for the task. Neoth gave an embarrassed cough and looked away. A flush tinged his cheek. For all he had seen and done, he was young yet, just 17. This time there was no doubt about Bulwer's thin smile. "I think your life might make a story," the general said, her expression inviting him to tell as much of it as he would. "I'd rather my life were ordinary," he told her. Stories were no place for a man who wanted peace. "One day, I'd very much like to see some of these Trollocs I keep hearing about," Mishima said when the silence began to stretch. Amusement tinged his smell, yet he stroked his sword hilt, perhaps without knowing it. "No, you wouldn't," Perrin told him. "You'll get your chance sooner or late, but you won't like it." After a moment, the scarred man nodded solemnly in understanding, amusement melting. At last, he must be beginning to believe that Trollocs and Myrddraal were more than travelers' fanciful tales. If any doubts remained to him, the time was coming that would erase doubt forever. Heading into Almazar, as they turned their horses toward the north end of the town along a narrow cart lane, Bulwer slipped away. Midori went with him, a tall woman nearly as dark as Tylee, but with deep blue eyes, in dark breeches and a man's coat with puffy red-striped sleeves, a sword at her hip. Bulwer rode with his shoulders hunched, a bird perched precariously on his saddle. Midori, straight-backed and proud, every inch a High Lord's daughter and leader of Fail's people, though she followed Bulwer rather than riding beside. Surprisingly, Fail's hangers-on seemed to have accepted taking direction from the fussy little man. It made them much less bother than they once had been. It actually made them useful in some ways, which Perrin would have thought impossible. The Banner General offered no objection to them leaving, though she gazed after them thoughtfully. "Kind of the lady to visit a servant's friend," she mused. That was the tale Bulwer had given, that he used to know a woman who lived in Almazar, and Midori wanted to meet her if she was still alive. "Midori's a kind woman," Perrin replied. "It's our way, being kind to servants." Tylee gave him one glance, only that, yet he reminded himself not to take her for a fool. It was too bad he knew nothing of Shanshan ways to speak of, or he might have come up with a better story. But then Bulwer had been in a frenzy, a dry, dusty frenzy, yet still a frenzy, to seize this chance to gather information on what was happening in Amadisia under the Shanshan. For himself, Perrin could barely make himself care. Only Fail mattered now. Later he could worry about other matters. Just north of Almazar, the stone walls dividing 7 or 8 fields had been removed to make a long stretch of bare earth that appeared thoroughly turned by the harrow, the dirt all scored and scuffed. A large, odd creature with a pair of hooded people crouched on its back was running awkwardly along that stretch on 2 legs that seemed spindly for its size. In fact, odd barely began to encompass it. Leathery and gray, the thing was larger than a horse, without counting a long, snake-like neck and a thin, even longer tail that it held stretched out stiffly behind. As it ran, it beat wings ribbed like those of a bat, stretching as long as most river ships he had seen. He had seen animals like this before, but in the air and at a distance. Tylee had told him they were called Rakan. Slowly the creature lumbered into the air, barely clearing the treetops of a coppiced thicket at the end of the field. His head swiveled to follow as the Rakan climbed slowly toward the sky, awkwardness vanishing in flight. Now, that would be a thing, to fly on one of those. He crushed the thought, ashamed and angered that he could let himself be diverted. The Banner General slowed her bay and frowned at the field. At the far end, men were feeding 4 more of the peculiar animals, holding up large baskets for them to eat from, horned snouts darting and horny mouths gulping. Baron hated to think what a creature that looked like that might eat. They should have more rockin' than this here, she muttered. Now this is all there are. We take what we can get and go on, he said. None if it comes to that. We already know where the Shido are. I like to know if anything is coming up behind me, she told him dryly, picking up the pace again. At a nearby farm that appeared to have been taken over by the Shan, a dozen or so soldiers were dicing at tables set up haphazardly in front of the thatch-roofed house. More were passing in and out of the stone barn, though he saw no sign of horses except for a team hitched to a wagon that was being unloaded of its crates and barrels and jute sacks by a pair of men in rough woolens. At least Baron assumed the others were soldiers. Nearly half were women, the men as short as the women, for the most part, and thin, if taller, and none carried a sword, but they all wore close-fitting coats of sky blue, and each had a pair of knives in scabbards sewn to their snug boots. Uniforms implied soldiers. Nat would be right at home with this lot, he thought, watching them laugh over good tosses and groan over bad. Those colors spun in his head, and for an instant he glimpsed Matt, riding off a road into forest, followed by a line of mounted folk and pack horses. An instant only, because he dashed the image aside without so much as a thought to why Matt was going into the woods, or who was with him. Only Fail mattered. That morning he had tied a 51st knot in the leather cord he carried in his pocket. 51 days she had been a prisoner. He hoped she had been a prisoner that long. It would mean she was still alive to be rescued. If she was dead. His hand tightened on the head of the hammer hanging at his belt, tightened until his knuckles hurt. The Banner General and Mishima were watching him, he realized, Mishima warily with a hand hovering near his sword hilt, Tai Li thoughtfully. A delicate alliance and little trust on either side. For a moment, I thought you might be ready to kill the flyers, she said quietly. You have my word. We will free your wife, or avenge her. Baron drew a shuddering breath and released his hold on the hammer. Fail had to be alive. Alice had said she was under her protection, but how much protection could the Aes Sedai give when she wore Gaishine White herself? Let's be done here. Time is wasting. How many more knots would he need to tie in that cord? The lights send not many. Dismounting, he handed Stayer's reins to Carlon Belsalona, a clean-shaven tyrant with a long nose and an unfortunately narrow chin. Carlon had a habit of fingering that chin as if wondering where his beard had gone, or running a hand over his hair as though wondering why it was tied with a ribbon at the nape of his neck, making a tail that just reached his shoulders. But he gave no more sign of giving up his fool pretense that he was following Aiel ways than the others did. Bulwer had given them their instructions, and at least they obeyed those. Most of them were already drifting over to the tables, leaving their mounts in the care of the rest, some producing coin, others offering leather flasks of wine, which the soldiers were rejecting, strangely, though it seemed anyone with silver was welcome in their games. Without more than glancing in their direction, Perrin tucked his gauntlets behind his thick belt and followed the two Shongshan inside, tossing back his cloak so his silk coat showed. By the time he came out, Fail's people, his people, he supposed, would have learned a great deal of what those men and women knew. One thing he had learned from Bulwer, knowledge could be very useful, and you never knew which scrap would turn out worth more than gold. For the moment, though, the only knowledge he was interested in would not come from this place. The front room of the farmhouse was filled with tables facing the door, where clerks sat poring over papers or writing. The only sound was the scritching of pen on paper and a man's dry, persistent cough. The men wore coats and breeches of dark brown, the women dresses in the exact same shade. Some wore pins in silver or brass in the shape of a quill pen. The Shongshan had uniforms for everything, it seemed. A round-cheeked fellow at the back of the room, who wore 2 silver pens on his chest, stood and bowed deeply, belly straining his coat as soon as Tai Li entered. Their boots were loud on the wooden floor as they walked back to him between the tables. He did not straighten until they reached his table. "Tylee Kirgan," she said curtly. "I would speak with whoever is in command here." "As the Banner General commands," the fellow replied obsequiously, made another deep bow, and hurried through a door behind him. The clerk, who was coughing, a smooth-faced fellow, younger than Perrin, who by his face might have come from the Two Rivers, began hacking more roughly and covered his mouth with a hand. He cleared his throat loudly, but the harsh cough returned. Mishima fronted him. "Fellow shouldn't be here. He's ill," he muttered. "What if it's catching? You hear all about all sorts of strange sicknesses these days. Man's hale at sunrise, and by sunfall he's a corpse and swollen to half again his size, with no one knowing what he died of. I heard of a woman who went mad in the space of an hour, and everybody who touched her went mad too. In 3 days she and her whole village were dead, those who hadn't fled." He made a peculiar gesture, forming an arc with the thumb and forefinger. The others curled tightly. "You know better than to believe rumors or repeat them," the Banner General said sharply, making the same gesture. She seemed unaware she had done so. The stout clerk reappeared, holding the door for a graying, lean-faced man with a black leather patch hiding the spot where his right eye had been. A puckered white scar ran down his forehead, behind the patch, and onto his cheek. As short as the men outside, he wore a coat of darker blue, with 2 small white bars on his chest, though he had the same sheaths sewn to his boots. "Blasik Paloon, Banner General," he said with a bow as the clerk went back to his table. "How may I serve you?" "Captain Falloon, we need to speak in—" Tylee cut off when the man who was coughing surged to his feet, his stool toppling with a clatter. Clutching his middle, the young man doubled over and vomited a dark stream that hit the floor and broke up into tiny black beetles that went scurrying in every direction. Someone cursed, shockingly loud in what was otherwise dead silence. The young man stared at the beetles in horror, shaking his head to deny them. Wild-eyed, he looked around the room, still shaking his head, and opened his mouth as if to speak. Instead, he bent over and spewed another black stream, longer, that broke into beetles darting across the floor. The skin of his face began writhing as though more beetles were crawling on the outside of his skull. A woman screamed, a long shriek of dread, and suddenly clerks were shouting and leaping up, knocking over stools and even tables in their haste, frantically dodging the flitting black shapes. Again and again the man vomited, sinking to his knees, then falling over, twitching disjointedly as he spewed out more and more beetles in a steady stream. He seemed somehow to be getting flatter, deflating. His jerking ceased, but black beetles continued to pour from his gaping mouth and spread across the floor. At last, it seemed to have gone on for an hour, but could not have been more than a minute or two. At last, the torrent of insects dwindled and died. What remained of the fellow was a pale, flat thing inside his clothes, like a wineskin that had been emptied. The shouting went on, of course. Half the clerks were up on the tables that remained upright, men as well as women, cursing or praying or sometimes alternating both at the top of their lungs. The other half had fled outside. Small black beetles scuttled all across the floor. The room stank of terror. "I heard a rumor," Balloon said hoarsely. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He smelled of fear. Not terror, but definitely fear. "From east of here. Only that it was centipedes. Little black centipedes." Some of the beetles scurried toward him, and he backed away with a curse, making the same odd gesture that Tylee and Mishima had. Perrin crushed the beetles under his boot. They made the hair on the back of his neck want to stand, but nothing mattered except Fail. Nothing. "They're just borer beetles. You can find them almost anywhere there's old fallen timber." The man jerked, lifted his gaze, and jerked again when he saw Perrin's eyes. Catching the sight of the hammer at Perrin's belt, he darted a quick, startled glance at the Banner General. These beetles came from no log. They're soul blinders' work. That's as may be, Perrin replied calmly. He supposed Soul Blinder was a name for the Dark One. It makes no difference. He moved his foot, revealing the crushed carcasses of 7 or 8 of the insects. They can be killed, and I have no time to waste on beetles I can crush underfoot. We do need to talk in private, Captain, Tiley added. Her scent was full of fear too, yet tightly controlled. Mishima's hand was locked in that same strange gesture. His fear was almost as well controlled as hers. Balloon gathered himself visibly, the fear smell fading. It did not go away, yet he had mastery of himself now.
All
He
right.
avoided looking at the beetles, however. As you say, General, Etal, get down off that table and have these things swept out of here, and see that Metan is laid out properly for the rites. However he died in service. The stout clerk bowed before climbing down, gingerly, and again when he was on the floor. But the captain was already turning away. Will you follow me, Banner General? His study might have been a bedroom originally, but now it held a writing table with flat boxes full of papers, and another table, larger, that was covered with maps, weighted down by inkwells, stones, and small brass figures. A wooden rack against one wall held rolls that appeared to be more maps. The gray stone fireplace was cold. Balloon gestured them to half a dozen mismatched chairs that stood on the bare floor in front of the writing table and offered to send for wine. He seemed disappointed when Tiley refused both. Perhaps he wanted a drink to steady his nerves. A small scent of fright still clung to him. Tiley began. I need to replace 6 Rakan, Captain, and 18 Morat Rakan, and a full company of groundlings. The one I had is somewhere in Amadisia, heading west and beyond finding. Balloon winced. General, if you lost Rakan, you know everything has been stripped to the bone because of... His one eye flickered to Perrin, and he cleared his throat before going on. You ask for 3/4 of the animals I have left. If you can possibly do with fewer, perhaps only 1 or 2. 4, Tiley said firmly, and 12 flyers. I'll settle for that. She could make that slurred Shonchan accent sound crisp when she wanted to. This region is as stable as Shandai by all I hear, but I'll leave you 4. As you say, Banner General, Balloon sighed. May I see the order, please? Everything has to be recorded. Since I lost the ability to fly myself, I spend all my time pushing a pen like a clerk. Lord Perrin, Tiley said, and he produced the document signed by Suroth from his coat pocket. That made Falloon's eyebrows climb higher and higher as he read, and he fingered the word seal lightly. But he did not question it any more than the Banner General had. It appeared the Shonchan were accustomed to such things. He appeared relieved to hand it back, though, and wiped his hands on his coat unconsciously. Accustomed to them, but not comfortably so. He studied Perrin, trying to be surreptitious, and Perrin could all but see on his face the question the Banner General had asked. Who was he to have such a thing? I need a map of Altara, Captain, if you have such a thing, Tiley said. I can manage if you don't, but better if you do. The northwestern quarter of the country is what I'm interested in. You're favored by the light, Banner General, the man said, bending to pull a roll from the lowest level of the rack. I have the very thing you want. By accident, it was in with the Amadisian maps I was issued. I'd forgotten I had the thing until you mentioned it. Uncommon luck for you, I'd say. Perrin shook his head slightly. Accident, not Taviran work. Even Rand was not Taviran enough to make this happen. The colors whirled, and he splintered them unformed. Once Falloon had the map spread out on the map table, the corners held down by brass weights in the form of Rakan, the Banner General studied it until she had her landmarks fixed. It was large enough to cover the table and showed exactly what she had asked for, along with narrow strips of Amadisia and Gillidan. The terrain rendered in great detail with the names of towns and villages, rivers and streams in very small letters. Baron knew he was looking at a fine example of the mapmaker's art, far better than most maps. Could it be Tadiran work? No, no, that was impossible. They'll find my soldiers here, she drawled, marking a point with her finger. There,
Yeah. All right, everyone. I'm gonna call into this live a little early tonight. Gotta get up a little bit early tomorrow. Do all kinds of running around. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I definitely appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.